One day on the plains of Gaugamela changed the world forever. Alexander faced Darius, and the fate of an empire hung on a sword's edge. The dawn in early October of 331 BC broke over the plain of Gaugamela like a pale promise, yet the air itself seemed charged with the weight of destiny. Mist hovered over the undulating terrain, clinging to the low hills and scattering across the ancient roads that would soon bear the weight of empires. From afar, the Persian army stretched like a living wall of bronze and iron, tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry archers and towering war chariots, their polished armor catching the first hesitant rays of sunlight. Their banners fluttered in a silent hymn to imperial might, colors vivid against the morning haze. Somewhere within that throng, Darius III, the King of Kings, surveyed his domain with a mixture of pride and dread, fully aware that history itself waited on the outcome of this day. On the opposite horizon, Alexander of Macedon moved like a force born from legend. His soldiers, fewer in number yet steeped in discipline and fervent loyalty, lined the plain in formations honed by years of relentless campaigning. The echo of armor brushing against shield, the whispered prayers to Greek gods, and the faint smell of polished leather and blood-stained sweat filled the air. They did not merely march toward a battle. They marched toward a turning point that would reshape the world. The contrast could not have been starker. A well-fed, sprawling empire bristling with numbers and resources against a lean, hungry, and unyielding army bound together by ambition, trust, and a commander whose audacity knew no equal. Gaugamela was not just a battlefield. It was a stage set for a contest that would decide the fate of civilizations. Alexander's eyes swept the plain, noting every hillock, every fold of the terrain, calculating lines of advance as his mind worked with surgical precision. The Persian army had arrived early, claiming the advantage of preparation. Yet Alexander knew that courage, timing, and cohesion could eclipse mere quantity. He understood the stakes. A defeat would not merely slow his advance, it could shatter his dream of uniting East and West under a new Hellenistic vision. Victory, on the other hand, promised the collapse of centuries of Persian dominance and a pathway for the ideas, culture and philosophy of the Greeks to radiate across Asia like wildfire. And yet, for all its significance, the battle held intimate human drama. A young Macedonian soldier might glance at the shimmering line of Persian cavalry and feel the tremor of fear, or a veteran infantryman might remember the harsh winters of the Granicus River and the bloody sands of Issus, whispering silent prayers for divine favor. Across the Persian ranks, conscripts pulled from the furthest reaches of the empire shifted uneasily, sensing the tension, feeling the expectation of their king. Somewhere amid the banners and the drums, families, children, wives, parents had waved their men off with hope and trepidation, oblivious to the fact that the world's history was being written on this field of dust and steel. Visualize the scene for a moment. From a bird's-eye perspective, the Gaugamela plain stretches endlessly, bordered by low ridges and dotted with clumps of thorny shrubs. The morning mist swirls, sunlight slanting across the terrain, glinting on bronze helmets and the polished edges of scimitars. The Macedonian phalanx forms like a living mosaic of shields and spears, glinting silver and bronze, while Persian chariots and cavalry move in a slow, deliberate tide, a mass of coordinated potential energy. The distant thrum of war drums reverberates through the ground, mingling with the cries of hawks and the faint rustle of the wind across the plains, a symphony of anticipation. But Gaugamela was more than spectacle and strategy. It was a test of human will against the machinery of empire. Each movement carried weight, each decision the potential to alter the course of history. Alexander, the young Macedonian king, was acutely aware of this, his mind calculating, predicting, ready to seize the moment when timing, terrain, and temperament converged. In the silence before the clash, there existed a sense of inevitability, as though the fates themselves held their breath. This was the day the sun rose over more than just a battlefield. It rose over the twilight of the Persian Empire and the dawn of a new Hellenistic era. Every heartbeat, every drumbeat, every whisper of the wind carried the promise of greatness or the threat of annihilation. The plains of Gaugamela were ready. The world, unknowingly, waited. To understand Gaugamela, one must first trace the path that led Alexander and Darius to this fateful meeting. The Persian Empire, vast and ancient, stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, a mosaic of cultures, languages, and loyalties bound together under the authority of the Achaemenid kings. By the early 4th century BC, the empire had seen generations of rulers consolidate power through both diplomacy and conquest, their authority symbolized by immense palaces, imposing cities, and the unyielding infrastructure of royal roads. Darius III, ascending the throne in 336 BC, inherited a realm brimming with wealth but also vulnerability. Internal dissent simmered in distant provinces. Local satraps pursued personal ambitions, and whispers of past defeats, the humiliation at Issus, the losses to Greek mercenaries, clung to the crown like a shadow. Meanwhile, Macedon, a rugged kingdom on the northern fringes of Greece, had been transformed under the iron-willed leadership of Philip II. By the time of his assassination in 336 BC, Philip had created a professional army of disciplined phalanxes, companion cavalry, and siege specialists capable of challenging the mightiest armies in the known world. Alexander, barely 20 when he inherited the throne, brought a mind sharpened for strategy, audacity, and a vision that went beyond territorial conquest. He sought a fusion of cultures, the spread of Greek knowledge, and the creation of an empire unified under his command. His early campaigns in the Balkans and Asia Minor, crossing the Hellespont in 334 BC, defeating the Persians at the Granicus River, and pushing through the narrow passes at Issus in 333 BC, set the stage for a confrontation with Darius that would define the era. The roots of the conflict were as much political as they were personal. Darius III viewed Alexander's advance as an existential threat to his authority and the stability of Persia. The defeat at Issus, where the Persian army was routed despite its superior numbers, humiliated the king, exposing both strategic weaknesses and the vulnerability of his generals. Alexander, in turn, sought to deliver a decisive blow to ensure that Persian resistance would crumble and that his army could press eastward into Mesopotamia and beyond without the looming shadow of a Persian counterattack. The stakes were clear. Failure for Alexander could mean the loss of his nascent empire, while defeat for Darius could signal the end of an empire that had dominated the Near East for centuries. The political landscape of the time added layers of complexity. Greek city-states, long under the sway of Persian influence, watched Alexander with a mix of awe and apprehension. Satraps in Egypt and the Levant had already begun recalculating allegiances, some covertly assisting the Macedonians to hedge their bets. Within Persia itself, the loyalty of the provinces was uneven. Distant armies, hastily conscripted, could not match the cohesion of Alexander's phalanxes. The Persian king, therefore, faced the challenge of uniting a fragmented force, rallying soldiers who had never fought together, and confronting an opponent who had repeatedly demonstrated tactical brilliance. Economically, the conflict was immense in scale. Macedon, though smaller, leveraged every resource, from the gold mines of Mount Pangaean to the skilled metallurgists of Thessaly, to supply armor, weapons, and horses. Persia relied on its vast wealth, levying armies from across its provinces, Medes, Bactrians, Armenians, and beyond. Each unit brought unique skills and equipment, from the light cavalry of the Iranian plateau to the elephant corps of India-inspired contingents, though their coordination posed a challenge for the Persian command. The logistical feat of assembling tens of thousands of soldiers, supplying them with food, water, and horses, and moving them across hundreds of kilometers of terrain was monumental. Yet both sides executed it with precision, born of necessity. Socially, the war had already begun to reshape perceptions of leadership and loyalty. Soldiers in Alexander's army were not just mercenaries or conscripts. They were a disciplined brotherhood, bound by oath and shared hardship. Persian troops, while numerically superior, faced the psychological strain of serving under a king whose authority was increasingly questioned. Rumors circulated in the weeks leading to Gaugamela. Whispers that Alexander would not merely defeat Persia but dismantle the empire entirely, or that Darius might flee at the first sign of adversity, a shadow of fear that would prove prophetic. Previous encounters informed strategies on both sides. Alexander's victories at Granicus and Issus had demonstrated the effectiveness of the Macedonian phalanx, supported by heavy cavalry. But Darius's forces had also adapted, learning to extend their lines and exploit flanks. Both commanders understood that the coming battle would hinge not only on numbers, but on ingenuity, timing, and the morale of their troops. Darius chose Gaugamela for its flat, open terrain, ideal for cavalry maneuvers and chariots. Terrain that he believed would allow him to use sheer weight and breadth to crush the Macedonians. Alexander, however, saw the plain as an opportunity to execute flexible, angled formations that could exploit the overextended Persian lines. Maps of the era reveal the geographic stakes. Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq, sat strategically between Babylon and the Persian heartlands. Control of this plain meant access to critical supply routes, the ability to threaten core Persian cities, and the chance to force Darius into a decisive engagement. Chronologically, the years from 334 to 331 BC mark a relentless Macedonian advance across Anatolia. Syria and Mesopotamia, culminating in this moment where the cumulative experience, planning, and audacity of Alexander faced the full weight of an empire. Every campaign, every skirmish, every tactical improvisation had led to this flat, misty expanse where history itself waited to be written. And yet, amid the sweeping strategies and imperial ambitions, the personal dimension loomed large. Darius, the Persian king, faced a monarch who seemed almost superhuman in daring and discipline. Alexander, the young Macedonian, confronted an empire whose shadow had loomed over the known world for centuries. Each side was acutely aware that the coming clash would decide not merely borders or territories, but the trajectory of civilization itself, an outcome that would ripple across centuries, influencing culture, governance, and military thought. As the Macedonian and Persian forces drew closer, the plains of Gaugamela transformed from an expanse of quiet dawn into a theater of meticulous preparation. On the Macedonian side, campfires flickered against the early morning haze, glinting off polished shields and armor as soldiers performed final inspections of their weapons. Spears were sharpened, the phalanx formations drilled one last time, and the companion cavalry, Alexander's elite mounted force, practiced charges along measured stretches of the plain. The scent of leather, sweat, and the earthy aroma of the dust-laden terrain mingled, a sensory prelude to the violence that would soon erupt. Alexander himself walked among the troops, cloak trailing in the wind, observing, correcting, inspiring. His presence was both reassurance and silent declaration. Victory is possible. Victory is ours. Alexander's planning reflected a mind that melded audacity with precision. He understood the challenges posed by Darius's numerical superiority, the vast cavalry flanks, and the phalanx of war chariots designed to sow chaos. To counteract this, he implemented a flexible oblique formation, angling his right wing to extend outward, a subtle maneuver intended to draw Persian forces into a trap and create gaps for decisive cavalry strikes. Engineers and aides marked terrain, noting depressions and uneven ground that might hinder enemy chariots. Scouts reported constantly the location of Persian camps, the movement of cavalry, the positioning of elephants and heavy infantry. Each piece of intelligence was scrutinized, integrated into the broader plan that balanced aggression with adaptability. Morale was cultivated as carefully as strategy. Alexander delivered speeches to stir courage, reminding his men of past victories, the crossing of the Hellespont, the triumph at Issus, and the promise of glory and wealth in the Persian heartlands. Soldiers responded not merely to orders but to the magnetic authority of a commander whose personal bravery was legendary. Stories circulated among the ranks. Alexander had once personally led charges into enemy lines, slain foes in single combat, and survived situations that would have broken lesser men. These tales, whether entirely accurate or embellished, reinforced an ethos of courage, unity, and absolute loyalty. On the Persian side, the scale of preparation was immense, yet fraught with complexity. Darius commanded an army reportedly numbering in the hundreds of thousands, though modern estimates suggest a figure closer to 100,000 to 50,000 combatants, but sheer size brought logistical challenges. Troops hailed from diverse regions, Medes, Bactrians, Saka horsemen, Arab infantry, and contingents from across the empire. Uniformity in command and coordination was difficult. Each unit brought its own traditions, equipment, and fighting style. War chariots were readied, their scythe blades sharpened, cavalry units drilled in flanking maneuvers, and archers positioned to create lethal crossfires. Persian engineers smoothed sections of the plain to allow chariot charges unobstructed movement, a subtle but critical adaptation to counter Macedonian discipline. Psychologically, the Persian army's preparation was both ritualistic and symbolic. Priests and court officials conducted blessings, offerings were made to Ahura Mazda, and Darius himself performed ceremonies to invoke divine favor. Within the ranks, the clatter of armor, the rhythmic training of cavalry, and the endless repetition of drills were intended to instill a sense of invincibility, to convince the soldiers that their numbers and wealth of experience would secure an unassailable victory. Yet beneath the surface, whispers of doubt existed, rumors of Alexander's cunning, tales of Macedonian endurance, and the psychological scars of past defeats at Issus and Granicus. The terrain itself became a participant in preparation. Gaugamela was a flat, expansive plain, dotted with low rises and shallow depressions, ideal for cavalry, but also demanding disciplined infantry formations. Both armies sent out reconnaissance units. Macedonian scouts rode swiftly along the flanks, noting the placement of Persian chariots and artillery, while Persian cavalry monitored the phalanx, attempting to discern patterns and weaknesses. Water sources, lines of retreat, and potential choke points were studied, not merely for immediate tactical advantage, but to anticipate the psychological pressures of prolonged engagement. Anecdotes from contemporary observers capture the human dimension of preparation. A soldier in Alexander's army reportedly recounted watching the Macedonian cavalrymen perform their morning drills, the precision of their formations, the gleam of their armor, the rhythmic cadence of hooves striking the earth. Similarly, Persian soldiers wrote later of the overwhelming size of their host, the glittering banners stretching across the horizon, and the palpable tension that gripped even the bravest among them. Civilians, too, noted the movement of troops, herders, merchants, and peasants observing columns of men advancing across the plain with a mixture of awe and fear, sensing that the fate of empires would unfold before their eyes. Logistics and provisioning played a crucial role. Macedonian supply lines had been stretched across hundreds of kilometers, relying on local allies, foraging parties, and carefully organized convoys. Persia, commanding a larger host, faced challenges in feeding, watering, and coordinating a heterogeneous force. Yet both sides demonstrated mastery of preparation, understanding that victory depended as much on readiness, discipline, and timing as on courage or numbers. In comparing the preparations at Gaugamela to other contemporary battles, Granicus, Issus, or earlier Persian conflicts, Alexander's meticulous planning stood out. His approach combined rigorous discipline with adaptive tactics, intelligence gathering, and psychological conditioning. Darius, while commanding a grand army, relied on overwhelming size and the psychological impact of display, banking on intimidation to compensate for potential gaps in cohesion. Each side, in essence, reflected the character of its commander. Macedon, precise and daring. Persia, vast and formidable, yet potentially unwieldy. As night fell over the Gaugamela plain, torches illuminated the Macedonian and Persian camps alike, casting long shadows over soldiers who would soon test courage against steel, strategy against instinct, and ambition against empire. By the following dawn, both armies would move from preparation to execution, and the fate of empires would hinge upon decisions made in the first hours of combat. The sun rose over Gaugamela on the morning of October 1st, 331 BC, spilling golden light across a plain that would soon tremble under the roar of thousands of warriors. Mist clung stubbornly to the earth, curling around horses' hooves and the polished shields of infantrymen. From a distance, the Macedonian phalanx appeared as a living mosaic of bronze and iron, long spears projecting like a forest of deadly reeds. Alexander, mounted on Bucephalus, surveyed the Persian host with a calm intensity, calculating angles, anticipating maneuvers, predicting human reactions under the pressure of fear, noise, and chaos. He knew that the battle would not be won by brute force alone, but by cunning, flexibility, and the precise exploitation of weakness. The battle opened with the clash of cavalry. Macedonian horsemen swept forward in disciplined arcs, skirting the flanks of Persian chariots, while Persian cavalry attempted to envelop the Macedonian wings. The sound was deafening, hooves pounding the earth, metal clashing on metal, war cries ricocheting across the plain. Dust rose in thick clouds, mingling with smoke from torches lit for signaling, reducing visibility and creating a surreal, almost apocalyptic scene. Archers on both sides let loose volleys, arrows streaking across the morning sky, dark specks against the rising sun. Alexander deployed his oblique phalanx with masterful precision. The right wing, reinforced and angled outward, drew the Persian left and center into a gradual stretch. Gaps appeared in the otherwise seemingly impregnable Persian line, and Alexander seized the opportunity. At the center, the Macedonian infantry advanced in tight formation, shields interlocked, sarissas, long spears over 6 meters in length, thrusting forward in deadly rows. Persian infantry tried to resist, their mass threatening to crush anyone unprepared. Yet the disciplined cohesion of the phalanx, combined with strategic flanking maneuvers, created a ripple of instability that would soon amplify into collapse. Pivotal moments emerged as the Macedonian companion cavalry, led personally by Alexander, pierced the Persian right flank. Charging like thunder across the plain, the cavalry cut through Persian horsemen and light infantry, sowing confusion and fear. Alexander's presence in the thick of combat amplified morale among his troops and magnified panic in Persian ranks. Contemporary accounts describe the scene. Alexander, charging at the forefront, spear in hand, cape flowing, eyes blazing with determination, a figure who seemed almost invincible amidst the chaos. Soldiers later recounted seeing their commander strike down elite Persian officers, opening breaches in the line that Macedonian infantry then exploited with devastating efficiency. Meanwhile, Darius faced a crisis of command. His chariots, intended to break Macedonian cohesion, were blunted by trenches and prepared obstacles, causing panic among drivers and riders alike. Persian cavalry and infantry attempted to regroup, but the stretching of their lines and the unexpected mobility of the Macedonian forces created lethal vulnerabilities. Darius reportedly attempted to rally his troops from the center of the battlefield, but confusion and fear were contagious. Soldiers faltered, units became isolated, and the grand tapestry of Persian might began to unravel. Amid the clamor of combat, human stories emerge that illuminate the chaos. A young Macedonian spearman, barely 20, later described the terror of facing a Persian chariot barreling toward him, the roar of the animals, the shriek of metal scythes, and the sudden, visceral instinct to step aside while thrusting his sarissa with precision. Simultaneously, a Persian archer recorded seeing the Macedonian phalanx advance like a relentless tide, their discipline unbroken by the screams, smoke, and blood-soaked dust. The battlefield was simultaneously epic and intimate, the clash of empires unfolding through the lived experiences of individual soldiers, each life contributing to the narrative of victory and defeat. By midday, the battle had reached its decisive phase. Alexander, recognizing the disarray within the Persian center, executed a bold charge directly toward Darius. The king, sensing imminent threat, attempted to maintain cohesion among his elite guards, but panic rippled outward. Horses reared, infantry wavered, and Darius was forced to retreat, abandoning the field to preserve his life. The psychological impact of seeing their king flee shattered Persian morale entirely. Troops who had fought bravely hours earlier now surrendered, fled, or were overwhelmed in pockets across the plain. Alexander's gamble had succeeded. The Macedonian army had turned the tide of battle through a combination of tactical ingenuity, disciplined execution, and audacious leadership. The aftermath of the engagement unfolded rapidly. Macedonian cavalry pursued fleeing units, preventing any attempt to regroup. Infantry swept through remaining Persian formations, securing prisoners and ensuring that the field was dominated by a force now fully in control. Yet even in victory, the grim realities of war were evident. The earth was churned to mud and dust, littered with bodies of men and horses, broken weapons, and the detritus of human conflict. The sounds of dying soldiers, the groans of the wounded, and the distant cries of horses created a haunting soundtrack that underscored both triumph and tragedy. Visualizing the battle from above reveals a masterclass in maneuver warfare. Macedonian units formed tight, shifting blocks, advancing where opportunity arose and pivoting to exploit weaknesses. Persian units, once a unified line stretching for kilometers, had become fragmented, flanking maneuvers intercepted, and reserves unable to plug the growing gaps. War chariots, once a terror on the open plains, were neutralized by terrain preparation and disciplined infantry. Cavalry charges, spear thrusts, and arrow volleys combined in a symphony of orchestrated chaos, each movement echoing Alexander's strategic vision. By sunset, Gaugamela had become more than a battlefield. It was a statement. The Macedonian army, though outnumbered, had achieved what many deemed impossible. They had shattered the heart of the Persian military machine, routed its king, and demonstrated that discipline, innovation, and leadership could overcome size and wealth. The plains, now silent except for the moans of the wounded and the distant flares of campfires, bore the imprint of history. The victory was complete, decisive, and monumental, signaling not just the fall of an army, but the collapse of an empire that had dominated the Near East for centuries. As the dust of Gaugamela settled, the stark reality of Alexander's triumph began to take shape. The plain, once alive with the fury of battle, now lay eerily quiet except for the cries of the wounded and the distant rumble of retreating Persian units. Macedonian soldiers moved through the field in organized sweeps, collecting prisoners, tending to the injured, and recovering what remained of weapons and standards. The scale of casualties was immense. Contemporary sources suggest thousands of Persian soldiers had fallen, their bodies strewn across the plain, while Macedonian losses, though significant, were markedly fewer, testimony to the discipline and tactical acumen that had guided them through the chaos. Darius III, the Persian king, had fled eastward in a desperate bid to regroup. His hasty retreat, witnessed by both friend and foe, struck a psychological blow to the empire he commanded. Soldiers who had fought valiantly hours earlier were left leaderless, morale collapsing under the weight of abandonment. Some surrendered immediately, others attempted to regroup, but found themselves cut off by Alexander's relentless cavalry. The sense of confusion and fear among Persian ranks was amplified by the Macedonians' methodical pursuit, ensuring that the remnants of the army could not mount a meaningful counterattack. Alexander, for his part, exhibited the dual qualities of pragmatism and psychological insight that had characterized his leadership throughout the campaign. He prioritized securing prisoners and maintaining order over indulging in unchecked plunder. Yet symbolic gestures of victory were equally important, capturing the royal standard, displaying banners, and allowing the army to witness the tangible results of their courage-reinforced cohesion and the legitimacy of their triumph. Soldiers, exhausted and bloodied, found in these rituals both reward and reaffirmation of their purpose. The Macedonians had not merely defeated an army, they had demonstrated the supremacy of strategy, discipline, and leadership. Among the Persian ranks, the immediate consequences were catastrophic. The breakdown of central command, the loss of elite cavalry, and the collapse of chariot divisions left the empire vulnerable. Key cities, including Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, were now exposed, their defenses weakened and morale shaken. Local satraps and provincial governors, long accustomed to the presence of the imperial army, now faced the prospect of either submission to Alexander or internal rebellion. For the Persian people, the news of Darius's flight and the loss at Gaugamela resonated like a shockwave. The reality of empire's fragility, once abstract, was now inescapably tangible. Visual cues from the aftermath paint a vivid picture. The battlefield itself was scarred and churned, mud and dust mingling with blood, broken spears protruding from the ground like mournful sentinels. Fires smoldered in scattered encampments, remnants of war machines burned or abandoned in haste. Macedonian soldiers, inspecting the field, moved with a mixture of reverence and pragmatism, tending to comrades, documenting the scene, and preparing for the next phase of the campaign. Persian survivors fled in disarray, leaving behind not only weapons but also symbols of imperial authority, banners, insignias, and the remnants of royal regalia, artifacts now destined to signal both defeat and transition. Civilian populations near the battlefield also bore witness to the consequences. Peasants and traders emerged cautiously from nearby villages, encountering soldiers carrying the spoils of victory, assessing damage, and gauging the new order. Accounts from local observers describe a surreal mixture of fear, awe, and relief. Fear of the ongoing violence, awe at the efficiency of Alexander's forces, and relief that the Macedonians were disciplined enough to avoid indiscriminate pillage in the immediate aftermath. The battle had already begun to reshape the psychological landscape, altering allegiances, prompting cautious diplomacy, and redefining the perception of power in Mesopotamia. Strategically, the immediate aftermath confirmed Alexander's brilliance. By neutralizing the Persian army and forcing Darius to flee, he not only secured the eastern flank of his campaign, but also demonstrated the futility of opposing him with traditional mass formations and reliance on sheer numbers. Macedonian morale soared, soldiers emboldened by the tangible proof that disciplined tactics could overcome monumental odds. For Darius, the flight and collapse of his forces marked a nadir. The empire's military reputation lay in ruins, and the king himself faced a precarious journey to rally support from increasingly independent satraps and territories. Among Alexander's commanders, reflection mixed with anticipation. They recognized that Gaugamela was not merely a victory in battle, but the opening chapter of a campaign that would allow the Macedonians to penetrate the very heart of the Persian Empire. The immediate challenge would be to consolidate gains, secure supply lines, and press the advantage before Darius could regroup or exploit the empire's vast resources. Every step taken in the aftermath, from tending the wounded to reassigning units to strategic positions, was a deliberate move in a broader chess game that extended far beyond the plains of Gaugamela. Ultimately, the battlefield stood as both witness and memorial. It recorded the collapse of one of history's greatest empires and the ascendance of a leader whose ambition, audacity, and strategic genius would ripple across continents. Casualties and chaos, fear and courage, discipline and improvisation, all had converged in a single day to create a turning point not only for armies, but for civilizations, marking the transition from Persian dominance to the era of Hellenistic influence that Alexander would spread across the known world. The reverberations of Gaugamela extended far beyond the shattered plains of Mesopotamia, transforming political, military, and cultural landscapes for generations to come. Strategically, the Macedonian victory dismantled the Persian Empire's backbone. Cities that had once seemed untouchable, Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, were now vulnerable to rapid occupation. Alexander's path eastward was cleared, allowing him to consolidate power over critical economic centers, control vital trade routes, and secure territories that had long fueled Persian wealth. The victory not only neutralized a formidable enemy army, but fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Near East, positioning Macedon as a dominant military and political force. Politically, Gaugamela shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. Darius III's retreat, widely observed across the empire, diminished the king's authority in the eyes of his satraps and subjects. Regional governors, previously loyal only to the crown's prestige, began considering allegiances to the new conqueror. Many cities, recognizing the inevitability of Macedonian ascendancy, surrendered with minimal resistance, seeking to maintain stability and safeguard local economies. Alexander's policy of incorporating local elites into governance and respecting regional customs further solidified his control. By contrast, Persia's loss at Gaugamela marked the beginning of its fragmentation. The empire, once a cohesive administrative entity spanning 3 continents, now faced a crisis of legitimacy and cohesion. Socially, the battle catalyzed profound shifts. The Macedonian approach to conquered peoples emphasized integration rather than wholesale eradication. Soldiers settled in newly acquired territories, establishing garrisons and colonies that would later become centers of Hellenistic culture. Greek language, art, philosophy, and administrative practices began permeating societies from Babylon to the Persian heartlands. Urban centers were rebuilt, markets revived, and civic institutions reoriented to accommodate the new political reality. The movement of people, soldiers, administrators, merchants, and settlers, facilitated a blending of cultures, seeding what historians now call the Hellenistic world. Economically, the Macedonian victory had immediate and enduring effects. The capture of Persia's wealth, treasuries, tribute, and infrastructure funded further campaigns into Central Asia and India. The redistribution of resources incentivized loyalty among Macedonian officers and troops, while also stabilizing newly conquered territories. Trade networks, once dominated by Persian policies, now adapted to Greek mercantile practices, allowing goods, ideas, and technologies to flow along expanded routes that connected East and West more directly than ever before. The integration of these economies laid the groundwork for a period of prosperity and cultural exchange unparalleled in the ancient world. Culturally, the battle's impact was equally significant. Alexander's conquests, inaugurated decisively at Gaugamela, facilitated the spread of Hellenistic art, architecture, and urban planning. Temples, theaters, and gymnasiums sprang up across the former Persian territories, blending Greek aesthetic principles with local traditions. The Macedonian presence encouraged intellectual exchanges, with Greek scholars and local thinkers collaborating in newly established centers of learning. The cross-pollination of ideas, from astronomy to medicine, was a direct consequence of the military successes that began with decisive victories like Gaugamela. From a military perspective, the battle became a textbook case in the study of strategy, leadership, and operational execution. Generals and historians across centuries analyzed Alexander's use of oblique formations, the coordination of cavalry and infantry, and the psychological exploitation of enemy command structures. Gaugamela demonstrated that a numerically inferior but cohesive and well-led army could defeat a larger, more unwieldy force. It also illustrated the value of terrain preparation, reconnaissance, and adaptability under pressure. Subsequent commanders, from the Roman Republic to Napoleonic Europe, would draw lessons from Alexander's tactics, attesting to the enduring legacy of the battle. Hypothetical what-if scenarios underscore the fragility of historical outcomes. Had Darius managed to maintain cohesion? Had the Persian chariots penetrated the Macedonian lines? Or had Alexander misjudged timing in the crucial cavalry charge? The empire could have survived for decades longer, perhaps even reversing the tide against Macedon. Such possibilities highlight how Gaugamela was not merely a contest of armies, but a convergence of leadership, opportunity, and human decision-making that shaped history in a single, decisive day. Visualizing the long-term impact offers striking imagery. Reconstructed cities blending Greek columns with Persian motifs, bustling marketplaces where languages and customs intermingle, trade caravans moving along secure roads once patrolled by Macedonian garrisons, and elite soldiers transitioning into civic administrators. Monuments, inscriptions, and public spaces commemorate both the battle and the broader cultural fusion that Alexander's victories initiated. Over time, the Hellenistic world became a testament not just to military conquest, but to the enduring integration of ideas, culture, and governance, a legacy born at Gaugamela. In sum, the aftermath of Gaugamela rippled through centuries, politically dismantling the Persian Empire, socially and culturally spreading Hellenistic influence, economically restructuring trade and wealth distribution, and militarily providing lessons in strategy and leadership that resonate even in modern analyses of warfare. It was a victory that reshaped continents, societies, and the trajectory of civilization, illustrating how one battlefield could alter the world far beyond the immediate conflict. The plains of Gaugamela were more than a battlefield. They were a crucible in which the fortunes of empires and the fates of leaders were tested, reshaped, and immortalized. Alexander's stunning victory over Darius III did not merely mark the end of Persian dominance. It crystallized lessons in leadership, strategy, and the indomitable spirit of human ambition. From the disciplined formations of the Macedonian Phalanx to the audacious charge of the companion cavalry, the battle exemplified how vision, adaptability, and courage can triumph over size, wealth, and tradition. Leadership emerges as the clearest lesson. Alexander, young yet fiercely calculating, demonstrated that authority is reinforced not just by rank, but by presence, decisiveness, and personal example. His ability to inspire troops, anticipate enemy movements, and adjust plans in real time underscores the enduring principle that successful command blends intellect with action. Conversely, Darius's flight highlights the fragility of leadership. When authority is undermined, morale falters, and fear permeates ranks. Command is as much psychological as logistical, a lesson echoed across history. Strategically, Gaugamela teaches the primacy of preparation, flexibility, and exploitation of terrain and timing. Numbers alone are insufficient when cohesion, morale, and ingenuity are lacking. Alexander's oblique formations, reconnaissance-driven adjustments, and carefully timed charges created decisive opportunities from seemingly equal or disadvantageous conditions. The battle also illustrates the dangers of over-reliance on numerical superiority without ensuring command coherence, a lesson that military planners from antiquity to modernity have revisited repeatedly. Human endurance and discipline stand out as another enduring takeaway. Macedonian soldiers, conditioned by relentless campaigning, harsh terrain, and rigorous training, maintained cohesion under extreme stress. Fear, chaos, and sensory overload, arrows, dust, blood, the roar of horses, did not break their formations. This underscores a broader truth. Preparation, morale, and mutual trust among units can amplify effectiveness far beyond the sum of raw strength. The psychological dimension of warfare, often overlooked in favor of tactics, proves equally decisive. The broader implications extend into society, culture, and even modern leadership principles. Alexander's integration of conquered peoples, respect for local customs, and establishment of Hellenistic centers illustrate that victory on the battlefield must be complemented by governance, diplomacy, and cultural vision to ensure lasting impact. Similarly, in contemporary contexts, the lessons of Gaugamela resonate. Decisive action, informed risk-taking, strategic foresight, and the ability to inspire teams remain as relevant in corporate boardrooms or political arenas as they were on the dust-choked plains of Mesopotamia. Reflective visual cues for this conclusion might show the sun setting over the Gaugamela plain, long shadows stretching across disturbed earth, Macedonian banners fluttering in the breeze, and distant silhouettes of cities awaiting occupation, panoramic views of reconstructed Hellenistic settlements, monuments commemorating the battle, and maps tracing Alexander's subsequent campaigns remind viewers of the enduring legacy sparked on this single day. It is a narrative where courage and strategy intersect with history, demonstrating that one engagement can ripple outward, shaping centuries of political, social, and cultural evolution. Ultimately, Gaugamela was decisive not simply for its immediate military outcome, but for its enduring historical impact. It was a collision of vision against tradition, strategy against numbers, and courage against uncertainty. Alexander's victory reshaped continents, dismantled an empire, and set a precedent in leadership and military science that echoes across time. From the roar of the first cavalry charge to the quiet reflection over a scarred plain, the battle embodies lessons in foresight, audacity, and the power of human endeavor that transcend the confines of its era.